Hey, this is Desirée for In Retrospect, a series where we take another look at a film to see if a new picture emerges. And today, we're looking at Stella Meghie's adaptation of Nicola Yoon's novel, Everything, Everything. It's this romantic coming-of-age story about a girl named Maddie who suffers from a rare immune disorder that makes her really vulnerable to infections.
I have way fewer lymphocytes than normal. And the ones that I do have, well, they're not so good at fighting.
And so to stay healthy, Maddie's been living in a sanitized environment under the medical care of her mom and nurse for the past 15 years. 15. Everything changes when her new neighbor Ollie moves next door. And he and Maddie strike up a friendship that soon develops into a really intense romance. This exciting turn of events makes Maddie question whether life is worth living when everything is off limits. And much of the film is about how she navigates this tension between listening to her mom and doing what she needs to stay alive, and listening to her heart and doing the things that give her life.
Hey, are you trying to kill yourself?
Okay, full disclosure. The first time I saw the movie, I was a little distracted and it didn't leave much of an impression. It was during this really rough patch when I was writing my dissertation and I couldn't stop watching movies about women who were either trapped or being terrorized in their homes. It was like this weird thing where I just needed to see people who were feeling the same level of dread that I was. I am so glad that's over. Anyway, rewatching Everything, Everything during the lockdown just makes the film hit different. And you know what I'm talking about.
Every day feels exactly the same.
But another thing that came to mind while rewatching the film is how gender double standards in art criticism make it really easy to overlook or devalue the artistic merit of movies that depict girls' lives. There's this perception that movie genres centering the experiences and viewpoints of girls and young women are way too commercial, too emotional, or just stereotypically girly.
This window. Had you ever gotten a perm before?
Yes.
And when it comes to movies about girls who aren't white, middle class, able-bodied, heterosexual, or living in the United States, there's an additional judgment that these films are too niche and not relatable. Whereas stories and movies about boys and guys are often seen as being more universal and conceptually rich.
It's a stupid idea.
You're stupid.
When in fact, there can be more to films about girls and young women than we might initially think or see.
I don't know how much longer I can take being 13.
And so, something that makes Meghie's romantic teen drama worth revisiting is how it uses narrative spaces in the house, the outside world, and within Maddie's imagination to kind of interrogate cultural norms that limit girls' abilities to make decisions about their bodies and their lives. So let's take a look at how three narrative spaces map Maddie's journey of transformation. There are lots of strong similarities between the story of Everything, Everything and the Maiden in the Tower fairy tale that emerged and developed in Persia, the Mediterranean, France, and Germany between the 10th and 18th centuries. In these stories, a girl is held captive by a guardian who wants to keep her safe from the dangerous outside world, which in these cases usually means a romantic relationship with a man. And the girl is either rescued or she uses magic to escape and ends up marrying a prince.
Beloved Rapunzel back to his castle, where they had a royal wedding.
But if you ask Maddie, she'd tell you,
I'm not a princess.
Good. Because I'm not a prince.
even though she hasn't been outside or allowed to meet new people in person for 15 years. And the film gives us some pretty good reasons to see her coming-of-age journey through that lens. Disney revamped the Maiden in the Tower fairy tale for its 2010 animated feature, Tangled.
Welcome home, Mother.
But we also see it in The Virgin Suicides and Mustang, two films that are often compared because they're both about sisters whose guardians lock them indoors as a way of controlling the girl's agency and a way of getting them to conform to cultural norms about girl sexuality. Much like these girls, Maddie doesn't have a say about where she goes, who she's with, or what happens to her body.
I don't understand. Why would you do that?
She's depicted as someone who has to be locked away because her body and her desires make her vulnerable to the outside world. So even though Maddie's home isn't used to preserve her virginity per se, it's used to preserve another kind of bodily purity that has similar implications for Maddie's agency. And this makes Maddie's crossing that threshold into the outside world a metaphor for growing up. One implication of being stuck inside is that Maddie has a very rich imagination. But Everything isn't the first coming-of-age film to portray girls' fantasies as the only places where they could be free. The Wizard of Oz is one of the most iconic films about a girl feeling stuck at home and the power of her imagination.
She isn't coming yet, Toto. Did she hurt you? She tried to, didn't she?
Dorothy wants to go somewhere that can change her experience of herself in the world. And she ends up going on this fantastic journey to the land of Oz, where she accidentally gets into even more trouble, learns how to face her fears, and discovers that
You've always had the power to go back to Kansas.
I have.
Then why didn't you tell her before?
Because she wouldn't have believed me. She had to learn it for herself.
But before leaving for Kansas, Dorothy learns another lesson.
If I ever go looking for my heart's desire again, I won't look any further than my own backyard.
Maddie's fantastic journey of self-discovery through magical realist places creates space for her self-expression and give her a sense of agency that she just doesn't have in the real world.
Are you on house arrest?
The vastness of Maddie's imaginary places break up the visual monotony of her confinement.
Pick up.
No.
And they point to her doubts about whether life on the outside is even possible. But unlike Dorothy,
Now which way do we go?
Maddie refuses to settle for a life of confinement, instead choosing to risk everything by following her heart's desire wherever it takes her. There's an obvious visual contrast between the constraints of Maddie's sanitized home and the expansiveness of the ocean. But the film also uses the ocean to signal changes in Maddie's relationship with her body and with other people. Obviously, Maddie gets inspired by Ollie's grand romantic gesture, but she's the one who decides to make her dream of seeing the ocean a reality. We see a lengthy shot of the ocean during Maddie's intimate night with Ollie, and we get several images of the ocean after Maddie's explosive confrontation with her mother about her medical diagnosis and treatment. In a way, it was kind of inevitable that the ocean would play such a pivotal role in Maddie's coming of age. I mean, just look at the film's color palette, Maddie's wardrobe, and the set design. There isn't a room in the house that doesn't reference or show a seascape. It was just a matter of time. Bottom line, the film's treatment of this narrative space tells us a lot more about Maddie's self-understanding and process of transformation than anything else in the film. So while Everything doesn't get everything right about living with SCID and is actually kind of about another disorder, refocusing our attention on the film's use of narrative spaces shows us there can be much more to movies about girls' lives than we might initially see. And that's a good thing.